India-Australia relationship this year has seen increased momentum. The Indian Prime Minister travelled to Sydney and the Australian Prime Minister travelled to India 2 times. With me is the Australian High Commissioner to talk about this relationship and many other things. So welcome to WION, and I'll begin by the recent happenings, the 2+2, which happened just 2 weeks ago. What were the key outcomes of that 2+2, and how did both the Indian side and the Australian side were able to work together to find convergences?
Well, it's great to be with you, Sidhant, and especially just so soon after what was a very successful 2+2. I think the key framing for the 2+2, as you said, is that it's been a landmark year between Australia and India. We are closer than we have ever been, and in the strategic field, there's a very high level of alignment. And that was evident in the conversations. I've been in a lot of these ministerial dialogues, and this was businesslike, purposeful, and with a real sense of shared objective. Our ministers respect each other, and it was a very good conversation. You asked what came out of it. We will do more together on maritime domain awareness. We will do more together in cohering the work of our diplomats across the Indo-Pacific on strategic fields where we very much feel alike. And then there were particular announcements on work together on hydrography, on a 1.5 track strategic dialogue that our officials and ministers and academicians will have together. We will continue aircraft deployments to each other's territory, and indeed naval deployments to each other's territory. So will be a stronger sense of interoperability between our forces and normalising the already higher level of activity between our forces that we see. Also, a bit of discussion on important economic spheres, especially the green energy supply chain, where Australia and India have complementary interests and we can work together. So overall, it was a really terrific hit out, and I know our ministers left feeling very much satisfied that this bilateral relationship continues to be on a clearly upward trajectory.
The relationship on upward trajectory, but briefly, how do you characterize this relationship today?
It's at the highest point that it's ever been, and my Prime Minister has given me a very clear signal that what he expects me to do is to push it as far and as fast as we possibly can. And, for me, there are 3 strategic drivers. The first is that in our views on the Indo-Pacific, we are aligned in a way that we never have been, and we're going to work together. In the economic field, there's a very high level of complementarity. Your society is growing fast and has much energy and vibrancy. We have a lot of energy and vibrancy innovation too, but I tell you what we have, the minerals, the metals, the critical minerals, the energy that can serve to support your economy as well as things in the education frame. And then the third field is what we call the human bridge. The nearly 1 million people of Indian origin who now make Australia home. In our context, that's a lot. They're making a big contribution to our society, and we want them to make a bigger contribution to our bilateral relationship, and we're very confident they will.
So let's now go to various pillars. Starting with education, we saw opening up of Australian University in Gujarat, which is a first for India as well. So education remains an aspect. If you can talk about that, and especially Indian students, one of the challenges the Indian students face is the visa issue. If you can talk about that as well, the problems they face.
Well, I think most of them don't face problems, those that have success. And the processing times for Indian students seeking a visa to Australia are now very short. We had a period after COVID where there was a big spurt and where we weren't able to cope with that and processing times were longer. Now they are shorter. People who have the right qualifications to go to Australia will get a visa. And many are. In fact, that number is increasing, and now Indian students are the second largest cohort of international students we have in Australia. But we're opening a whole new chapter next year, because for the first time there will be Australian branch campuses in India. And as you say, the first two will be in Gujarat. And we're very much looking forward to the University of Wollongong and Deakin, that they will be operating courses from the middle of next year. That's a huge new development. And as a result of the Indian government's decision to allow foreign branch campuses in other parts in India, apart from Gift City, we think that there will be many who will follow in the same footsteps.
Another pillar is defense, which has grown leaps and bounds. We have seen this year Indian submarines going to Australia, Indian forces taking part in exercises in Australia, and of course the Malabar exercises as well. So if we can talk about the defense aspect, where do you see the focus area? Any new developments which is expected to happen?
Well, I mean, Austria-Hind is happening now. That's a mostly army, but with Navy and Air Force elements as well. It's happening in Perth, Australia, with nearly 100 Indian soldiers, seamen and airmen and sailors. So I expect that higher level of tempo of exercises, higher levels of interoperability. But as I said to you at the start, a key thing that we are going to do more on is maritime domain awareness. We have a large Indian Ocean, and especially the Eastern Indian Ocean, which is of interest to both of us. We can each know something about what's going on in that domain, but we can't know all of it. It's massive. So working together, we can find ways of understanding more about that. And then at the day-to-day level, we are just normalising closer cooperation with defence and security agencies here in India and back in Canberra, and that continues to go from strength to strength.
Mm-hmm. And how both countries are working in the Pacific. When the Deputy Prime Minister came here in India, he talked about how the MLSA was used to send Indian humanitarian aid to Tonga. We also saw the visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Papua New Guinea. India has announced humanitarian aid to the country recently. So if we can talk about India and Australia working together in the Pacific.
You know, we've already got some really good runs on the board here. Don't forget that in the middle of COVID, it was Australia and India that cooperated to get vaccines to the Pacific. These were vaccines manufactured in India, desperately needed by the small countries of the Pacific. Of course, we have a lot of logistic capability there. Our aircraft fly in there all the time. And we essentially did the last mile delivery to Pacific countries of vaccines produced and donated by India. So, you know, that's a great start. As you said, Prime Minister Modi was there in Papua New Guinea earlier this year. Look, we are the largest development cooperation donor to the South Pacific. We regard South Pacific countries as our family, and they are the first call of our resources. As a result, you know, we know a fair bit about what their development needs are. We respect India's capability to produce development assistance to these countries which is appropriate to their circumstances. And so our role is to provide whatever guidance and support we can to the Indian effort to provide development assistance in our region, which we warmly welcome.
Any trilateral pact expected? I mean, a capacity building program in the Pacific, India, Australia coming together?
Look, that may be something for the future, but what we're very keen to do initially is to make sure that we provide whatever support the Indian government wants to ensure that good development assistance comes to our Pacific neighbours.
Mm-hmm. So now moving to the multilateral aspect, Quad is symbolic of what India and Australia can do together in multilateral forums. So how do you see Quad progressing? Key initiatives under Quad expected in 2024 as well, and India hosting the Quad summit. Apparently, the grapevine is on 27th of January. Is Australia planning to attend that Quad summit?
Well, look, Sidhant, I will leave announcements about the dates of the Quad summit to the people who should be making them, and notably Prime Minister Modi. I'm not going to get on his territory. But let me say this, I mean, I spoke to the Prime Minister when he was here for the G20. He's very much looking forward to the Quad Summit and will be flexible to make sure that we're available at a mutually convenient time. So it's of course a vitally important forum for us with our traditional alliance partner, the United States, with Japan, with whom we've had a deep, powerful economic partnership for decades, but are now on a rapid path to developing a stronger security partnership. And with India, where we have never previously seen the level of a strategic alignment that we're currently showing. So for us, it's very exciting. Now, you asked about what's going on. Well, you know, I remind you that during COVID, 400 million vaccines were delivered by the Quad countries to countries in the Indo-Pacific. So there's a lot of runs already on the board. We're focused on ensuring that our region remains peaceful and that it has an open and inclusive and free character. We're providing important public goods to countries of the region that will help their sovereign capability. Capabilities in counter-cyber, capabilities in helping them do maritime domain awareness, capabilities in building high-quality, sustainable infrastructure. So there's a wide canvas on which we're working, and our partnership, we think, is vital for our future, and there's a huge support for it in Australia.
So Diaspora is one other aspect of the relationship. We saw when the Prime Minister travelled to Sydney, Harris Park became Little India. If you can talk about that, and with Diaspora, there are certain issues as well. The Khalistani extremists, we saw earlier this year, they were involved in protests, and we also saw action by the Australian authorities. If you can sum up the aspects of Diaspora, how they're playing an important role, and what Australia is doing to deal with the Khalistani extremism.
Well, the first thing is there are now nearly 1 million people of Indian origin who make Australia their home, and they are making a big contribution to our society. We warmly welcome them, and we are, as government, seeking to engage them in our bilateral relationship. We've set up a Centre for Australia-India Relations, not far from Harris Park, which is led by 2 Australians of Indian origin, high quality people, and their job is to make sure that the Australian diaspora, the Indian diaspora in Australia, is activated so that it can benefit the bilateral relationship. Let me give you an obvious example. People of Indian origin in Australia will understand what Australia can do and understand India's economic systems. There may be ways in which they can support trade and economic activity between our nations. That's an opportunity we don't want to miss. So you spoke about Khalistan. Look, what is very important in Australia is that, well, 2 things that are vitally important. People have the right to demonstrate and undertake peaceful protest. That's a core part of our democracy. And we will always allow that to take place. The focus is on peaceful, and our security authorities, our migration authorities, our police authorities are very active in making sure that those demonstrations, when they occur, happen within normal parameters. We are acutely focused on defending the properties of Indian consulates general and the High Commission. That is important for India's respect and dignity, and we spend a lot of effort making sure that no problems occur there, and they haven't.
But there were certain reports of the Hindu temples being vandalized in Australia. I mean, what has been the action taken on that?
Well, those activities, if they have occurred, will be closely investigated by Australian police authorities. That action, that sort of activity warrants the police doing the best investigation that they possibly can. Now, whether they will actually be able to find the perpetrators, we can't tell, but I can assure you that there is a very deep focus, not just in the federal government in Australia, but also in state governments on avoiding these sorts of actions and undertaking the correct police response whenever they do.
So India and Australia share an ocean, that's the Indian Ocean. How both countries are working together in the Indian Ocean to deal with problems like illegal fishing, like piracy, human trafficking? So any mechanism which is being dealt on?
Well, I've already spoken about maritime domain awareness so that we both understand better what is happening in our shared Indian Ocean. And all of the fields that you mention are fields in which we are acting. I here at the office, I have staff from the Navy, I have staff from the Australian Border Force, I have staff from the Australian Home Affairs authorities, and a day does not go past where they are not engaging with their Indian counterparts about these activities. So we will be doing more because we take ever more seriously the significance of especially the Northeast Indian Ocean. And for us, for Australia, as we take a greater focus on that area of the world, and it's important that we have decided to host an Indian Ocean conference of ministers in Perth in February next year as part of that effort. As we undertake that closer engagement with the Indian Ocean, India will be our most vital partner.
So my last question to you is, how much China is a concern for Australia? Here in Delhi, China is a major concern with at the border. You have been facing problems as well. If you can sum up the China problem in the Indo-Pacific.
If I sum it up, I would say this: we will cooperate with China where we can, and we will disagree with them where we must. We have an economic relationship with China which is important to us. Our Prime Minister made a visit to China recently, and we have had some imperfections in our bilateral economic relations, and some of those are being resolved. We're pleased about that. We think that engagement with China and a level of cooperation with China is valuable, but we have differences with China. We ask the question, why is it that China is taking the biggest military modernization in the world since the Second World War? And that is happening without, as far as we can see, any open source explanation of its rationale or any strategic reassurance about what it's for. So we are cooperating with China where we can, but we will disagree, and we will ask questions of them where we must on issues that are difficult.
Thank you so much, sir, for speaking to WION on a range of topics, whether it's the India-Australia relationship, how both are cooperating in the Indian Ocean, and of course the China worry. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sidhant.